The Planter's Great Escape. Robert Smalls and the War for Freedom. Imagine the impossible. A man in chains steals the key to his own freedom and an enemy's most powerful weapon right out from under the nose of a heavily armed military base. It's a true story from the heart of the American Civil War. But it wasn't a white general or a famed abolitionist who accomplished this feat. It was Robert Smalls, an enslaved pilot who, in one audacious act, changed the course of the war, earned his freedom, and launched a political career that would redefine democracy in America. The air in Charleston, South Carolina, on the night of May 12, 1862, was thick and heavy, smelling of salt marsh and gunpowder. The Civil War was dragging into its second year, and the Confederacy's wealthiest port was under a constant nervous tension. Robert Smalls, a 23-year-old slave, stood on the deck of the CSS Planter, a 147-foot-long side-wheel steamer converted into a Confederate dispatch and transport boat. He was ostensibly on watch, but his mind was not on the dark, empty waters of Charleston Harbor. It was on a much deeper, more dangerous plan, one that meant life or death for himself and his family. Smalls was a highly skilled maritime pilot. Born in Beaufort, South Carolina, he had been brought to Charleston as a boy and mastered the intricate, treacherous waterways of the South Carolina coast, a knowledge considered invaluable by the Confederate military. The Confederates trusted him because, after all, he was property. They believed his loyalty, like his body, belonged to his master. This was their fatal mistake. That evening, the Planter's three white officers, Captain Relea, Chief Engineer Pocket, and Mate Samuel Smith, had left the ship to spend the night ashore. This was a common, reckless practice, one Smalls had been observing, timing, and praying for. He knew this was his chance. There would be no other. Smalls walked quietly to the lower deck. Beneath the silent, watchful gaze of the moon and the distant Confederate batteries, 8 other enslaved men and women were already waiting, huddled in the darkness, the crew Smalls had quietly recruited for this mission. He spoke in a low, firm whisper, his voice a steadying anchor against the fear that gripped them all. "It's time," he said. The group was already on edge. The crew members, John Smalls, no relation, Alfred Gradine, Peter Smalls, Abraham Jackson, Gabriel Turno, William Morrison, Samuel Chisholm, and Scott Chisholm had confided their deepest desire in him, freedom, and Robert Smalls had promised it to them. But their mission was bigger than just their own escape. Smalls knew the Planter was armed with valuable artillery, including 4 cannons. If they could deliver the ship and its cargo to the Union blockading fleet anchored a few miles offshore, it would be more than just an escape. It would be an act of war, a significant prize, and a monumental statement to the North about the desire for freedom among the enslaved people of the South. Smalls took his position in the pilot house. He was intimately familiar with every wheel, lever, and gauge, having served as the pilot despite the law forbidding an enslaved man to hold such a rank. He was the only person on the ship, white or black, who could truly navigate the harbor's shifting sandbars and hidden mines. He knew where the Confederate sentries were posted, the times they changed their shifts, and the routes the patrol boats took. He had internalized the very geography of his bondage. The first and most perilous hurdle was getting past the city's key defensive points. Smalls signaled the engine crew below. With a low chug that sounded deafening in the stillness of the pre-dawn darkness, the CSS Planter pulled away from Southern Wharf. Smalls steered the ship toward the mouth of the harbor. They had to pass 3 heavily fortified Confederate strongholds, Fort Johnson, Fort Moultrie, and the great unfinished Fort Sumter, the site where the war itself had begun. At Fort Johnson, the vessel was hailed by a sentry. Smalls, who had practiced the captain's movements, calmly leaned out of the pilot house. He knew the captain's distinctive mannerisms, the way he wore his straw hat, and how he always held his cigar. Most crucially, he knew the signal whistle that the captain used to pat. Smalls settled his family in Beaufort, his hometown, a coastal area where African Americans made up a vast majority of the population. This region, known as the Sea Islands, was largely exempted from President Andrew Johnson's pardons to Confederates, creating a unique political environment where black citizens could actually elect their own representatives. Smalls saw political participation as the true completion of the Emancipation Proclamation. He understood that freedom without political power was hollow. He worked tirelessly to register African American voters, traveling from plantation to plantation, speaking to crowds about the power of the ballot box. His message was simple but revolutionary. The government that had once enslaved them was now a tool they could wield. In 1868, the new state constitution was ratified, a testament to the brief but glorious triumph of biracial democracy in the South. Smalls was elected as a Republican to the South Carolina House of Representatives. He was only one of many African American leaders, including powerful men like Francis L. Cardozo, Secretary of State and Treasurer, and Robert B. Elliott, Speaker of the House. For a brief shining period, often called the Black Reconstruction, South Carolina had a majority black legislature. This legislature, which included former slaves and impoverished white farmers, enacted some of the most progressive legislation in U.S. history. Smalls played a direct role in creating free, universal public education. Before the war, it was illegal to teach a slave to read. Now, Smalls and his colleagues championed a system of free, mandatory public education for all children, black and white, laying the foundation for modern education in South Carolina. Land reform. Smalls was a strong advocate for black citizens' ability to purchase and own land. He knew that economic independence was essential for political freedom. He introduced legislation to help finance the sale of confiscated Confederate land to freedmen. Abolition of imprisonment for debt, a crucial safeguard for poor laborers. Abolition of the poll tax. This made it easier for poor citizens, black and white, to vote. Smalls was a practical legislator, focusing on policy that directly improved the lives of his constituents. His fame and intelligence allowed him to maneuver between the competing factions of the state Republicans, which were often split between white carpetbaggers, northern whites who came south, and scalawags, southern whites who supported Reconstruction, and the native-born black politicians. His political ascent continued. In 1870, he was elected to the South Carolina State Senate, where he served until 1874. His speeches were noted for their clarity, their pragmatism, and their unshakable faith in the principles of liberty and equality. He was a symbol of what Reconstruction promised, a new, just, biracial America. The shadow of redemption, the end of an experiment. The progress of Reconstruction was violently opposed by the old Southern elite, who could not stomach the idea of black men holding political power. They used all the tools at their disposal: political maneuvering, economic intimidation, and, most brutally, terrorism, orchestrated by paramilitary groups like the Ku Klux Klan and, in South Carolina, the Red Shirts. These groups aimed to redeem the state, a euphemism for restoring white supremacy. Black political success was met with a campaign of voter suppression, fraud, and violence. Smalls, as a prominent black leader, became a prime target. He faced threats constantly. In 1875, he was actually indicted and convicted of taking a bribe in a trumped-up case designed to remove him from politics. The charge was based on his involvement in a state printing contract. He was forced to appeal the conviction, a legal and political battle that drained his resources and damaged his reputation. In a bold move of political strategy, Smalls was one of several black leaders to appeal directly to the federal government for protection. But Northern interest in Reconstruction was waning. The country was exhausted by the decade of conflict and political turmoil. Despite the escalating danger, Smalls campaigned for a seat in the United States House of Representatives. He won, and in 1870,